My brother generously offered for Stephen and me to stay at his home rent-free, covering all utilities as well. As someone who manages finances for a living and with Stephen working as a mechanic, we were in a comfortable position. We lived in the house I grew up in, a property filled with family history. This house was once the hub of my father's business, and there were expectations that my brother would eventually take over. To prepare, he studied economics and even spent some time at Oxford University. After returning from his studies, he joined my father in running the business. When my parents decided to retire and move away, they handed over the business to my brother and gave me the house. Stephen and I decided to make it our home, mainly because it's in an ideal location, close to public transportation, schools, hospitals, and shops. It suited our current lifestyle perfectly and would continue to do so even after our children moved out. We felt immense gratitude toward my parents for such a thoughtful gift and were looking forward to starting this new chapter. However, shortly after settling in, my peace was disturbed by frequent, intrusive visits from my mother-in-law. She would often ask about my parents' financial situation, given their past as business owners. Her questions, like, "Angela, how much money do your parents have? What will you inherit?" made me uncomfortable. I would try to brush it off, telling her I hadn't given it much thought and that the house might be the only inheritance I'd receive, but she persisted, implying that my parents had shared their financial plans with me. Her probing seemed to stem from expectations of gaining something from their wealth, even though I had made it clear that my inheritance was likely limited to the house. Her continued questions made me uneasy, and I kept my discomfort to myself, especially since my husband, Stephen, is very close to his mother. Then, something utterly unexpected happened that left me reeling. It was around 7 a.m., on a holiday morning when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I was greeted by a mover, leaving me confused and startled. Before I could even react, my mother-in-law, along with my brother-in-law's family, showed up with the announcement that they were moving in. Their smirk sent an icy chill down my spine. Stephen, who had just woken up, seemed entirely unfazed by the situation. When I asked him about it, he shrugged and said, "What's the problem?" He casually pointed out that our house had enough space for everyone, as if it were perfectly normal for them to just show up and claim a spot. Things escalated quickly when my sister-in-law cheerfully explained that they had been invited by my brother and wouldn't need to pay for rent or utilities. She said they were looking forward to our hospitality. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law began going through the rooms, deciding which one he liked best based on the sunlight, and instructed Stephen to move our belongings to make space. It felt surreal. This was our home, but they were acting as though they owned it, opening doors, making decisions, and staking claims on rooms. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law had always been overbearing, even crossing boundaries like rifling through my bag without permission. Their behavior continued to infringe on my personal space, and I was fed up. This was the final straw. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Standing firm, I finally said, "This is my house. Why are you acting like you own it? I've had enough. I want you all to leave." Normally, I'm calm and composed, but seeing them take over the home my parents had entrusted to me, acting as if it was theirs to control, pushed me over the edge. But instead of backing down, one of them snapped, "How dare you talk to us like that? You should be the one to leave." Then, out of nowhere, I felt a sharp sting on my cheek. At first, I couldn't comprehend what had happened. It took me a moment to realize I had been slapped. My face throbbed with pain, but it was the emotional shock that hit me hardest. In that instant, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't live with people who showed such blatant disrespect. I grabbed a few things and, without looking back, made the decision to leave temporarily. I found a rental apartment for the time being. It wasn't ideal, especially since it meant commuting to work, but at that moment, it felt like the only choice. Once I had settled into the rental apartment, I called my parents to explain what had happened. Even over the phone, I could feel their anger and frustration. My father, who had always been able to juggle the responsibilities of being a strict CEO and a caring father, was especially upset. I hated having to involve them in this, particularly when they were finally enjoying their retirement, but I felt I had no choice. My home, the one my parents had entrusted to me, was being overtaken, and I couldn't let that continue. As I adjusted to life in the apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that Stephen and his family were settling in comfortably at my house. Encouraged by my brother and father's advice, I knew it was time to take action. A few days later, during a break at work, I checked my phone to find dozens of missed calls and messages from Stephen. I knew exactly why he was trying to reach me. It was time to confront the situation head-on, but this time, I would be prepared. I wouldn't face it alone, and I would take the necessary steps to reclaim what was rightfully mine. After much consideration, I decided to disconnect the electricity and water services to the house. The house was entirely dependent on these utilities, and without them, nothing would work. We hadn't yet installed solar panels, so there was no backup power source. Given the heat wave, I imagined that living without water or electricity would be incredibly inconvenient. It didn't take long for Stephen to start calling me. I figured this action would trigger a response, and sure enough, the calls started flooding in. As I was about to dismiss another one during my break, I saw his name again. "Hey, what's going on? There's no power, and the water isn't working. Did you cut off the utilities?" His voice was frantic, and I felt a pang of guilt, but I knew what I had to do. I calmly explained that since I no longer lived in the house, it didn't make sense for me to keep paying for services I wasn't using. The house was mine, and I wasn't going to keep covering utility costs when I wasn't there. The electricity and water weren't my responsibility anymore, I told him. Stephen was furious, demanding I turn the utilities back on immediately. But just because he wanted me to reinstate the services didn't mean I had to comply. I told him that if he wanted the utilities back, he would need to cover the costs himself. Every time the topic of finances came up, they insisted that since the house was mine, I should bear the costs, but their actions showed otherwise, and I wasn't about to pay for utilities when they were living in the house without my permission. I made it clear that I had no intention of renewing the utility contracts or of asking them to leave the house. After stating my position, I ended the call as my break was over. Not long after, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law all contacted me with similar complaints. Upset about the heat and the lack of water, they asked me to restore the utilities, but my decision was final. This wasn't just about the utilities, it was about setting boundaries and asserting control over my property. I firmly told them to handle the situation themselves and ended the call. I had a strong feeling they were just trying to take advantage, hoping I'd cave and they could keep living off me, but even after a week, they showed no sign of leaving. It became clear that I needed to act more decisively, so I reached out to a lawyer at my father's company. I explained the situation and asked him to send a formal notice to my husband, accusing them of trespassing. They had entered and taken over my house without permission, effectively forcing me out and treating it like their own. In the notice, I made it clear I was seriously considering legal action. This move caught my husband off guard. Surprised and anxious about the legal implications, he reached out, hoping for a way to resolve things. Knowing how much they cared about their social image, I understood that the threat of a lawsuit would cause them significant stress. They were now stuck between facing legal consequences and convincing me to let them stay. I saw right through my husband's attempts to manipulate me, but I refused to listen to his pleas or relent to his demands. Frustrated, my husband erupted during a call at work, angrily demanding that I drop the lawyer, accusing me of being self-righteous. Despite his outburst, I stayed calm and unaffected, irritated only by his audacity to assert any claim over my property. No matter how much he protested, I stood firm. If they refused to leave, legal action was inevitable. I ended the call, feeling like continuing the conversation was pointless. I had already discussed divorce proceedings with my lawyer. Later, I found missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but I chose not to engage. I blocked their numbers to avoid further disruption. The looming threat of a lawsuit was too much for my husband's prideful family to handle. Realizing they had no ground to stand on, they packed up and left. With the lawyer's help, the divorce negotiations went smoothly. I hired a professional cleaning service to refresh the house. After months of living in a rental, returning to my freshly cleaned home felt incredibly comforting. The peace and autonomy I regained made all my efforts worthwhile, reaffirming my decision to stand my ground and take back my space. Once I settled back in, I realized the house needed some repairs and updates. I discussed it with my father, who connected me to a reliable contractor. Planning the renovations was an exciting project, symbolizing a new chapter in my solitary life. Living alone brought an exhilarating sense of freedom. I could relax on the sofa without judgment, eat whatever I wanted, and truly enjoy the peace. But 5 months into this tranquility, I started getting calls from an unknown number. Initially, I thought it was the contractor, so I ignored it, but the calls kept coming. Finally, I answered, only to discover it was my ex-husband, someone I had just divorced, with a strict legal agreement that we wouldn't contact each other again. Annoyed and confused by his breach of our agreement, especially since he'd changed his number to reach me, I demanded to know why he was calling. Ignoring my questions, he begged me to listen. Reluctantly, I let him explain his situation. His company was facing a severe financial crisis, resulting in a significant pay cut. His mother's health was deteriorating, making it impossible for her to work, and his sister-in-law and her husband were struggling financially due to unstable jobs. Most of her earnings went to pay off her husband's debts. With his salary reduced, my ex-husband and his family were barely scraping by. I felt no sympathy for him. The memories of how they'd barged into my home, taken over without my permission, and tried to force me out were still fresh in my mind. Their earlier actions, full of disrespect, made it hard to care about their current hardships. I told him his problems were his to handle and reminded him of our legal agreement to cease all contact. As I ended the call, I couldn't help but think how unbelievable it was that the same people who had treated me so poorly now expected anything from me. I listened without a shred of sympathy as my ex-husband described their dire situation. "We're in serious trouble. We might not even be able to pay rent or buy food tomorrow. We used to be a family, right? Please help us," he pleaded, his voice breaking. But his words didn't sway me. I remembered all too well how, when I was struggling, he had stood by and done nothing to support me. He, along with my mother-in-law, had always looked down on me. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law joined in, mocking my appearance and my traditional values without any regard for my feelings. My mother-in-law not only made everything worse but also pressured me relentlessly to have a child, forcing herbal remedies on me, booking unnecessary medical appointments, and even spreading damaging rumors in the neighborhood about my ability to conceive. As these memories flooded back, it became crystal clear, there was never a time in my marriage when I felt truly supported. My once kind and caring ex-husband had become a puppet to his mother's control. I remembered a particularly painful incident shortly after we were married. I returned from an appointment to find my mother-in-law had visited our home, tearfully telling my husband she wanted to befriend me, all while secretly slandering me whenever she had the chance, both at home and in public. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law would laugh at me, ridiculing my every move. With a history like that, how could I possibly entertain the idea of helping them now? No matter what you say, my feelings won't change. I can't help you, I said firmly, my resolve unwavering. I wouldn't allow their current desperation to pull me back into their web of manipulation and disrespect. I'm hanging up now. Please never contact me again. I ended the call and immediately blocked the number. I knew my ex-husband well enough to expect that he might try to contact me again using a different number, but I was ready to keep my boundaries firm and unyielding. The following weekend, I planned to change my phone number to prevent further harassment, but before I could act, my ex-husband and his family broke the legal agreement we had established through our lawyers. Around 10 p.m., they showed up uninvited, banging on my door and shouting, "Open up, let us in, we need you, we're family, help us." Their loud voices shattered the calm of the night, showing no consideration for the time or the disturbance they were causing to the neighbors. Instead of confronting them directly, I attempted to reason with them through the intercom, urging them to leave and stop making a scene, but they ignored me and continued to pound on the door, escalating the noise. I was on the verge of calling the police when I heard sirens in the distance. It turned out that a neighbor had already called the authorities. When the police arrived, my ex-husband and his family panicked, mistakenly thinking I had made the call. They tried to flee, but with a crowd of onlookers gathering, there was no escape. The police intervened quickly, escorting them away. I gave the officers a full account of the events, explaining how they had unlawfully trespassed and caused a disturbance. The incident spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, and soon enough, word had reached my ex-husband's workplace, where a coworker had witnessed the scene. Already struggling with financial difficulties due to a salary cut, the public spectacle and police involvement were the final blows to his career. His employer, facing the fallout from his actions, decided to let him go. Without a job and unable to afford his rent, tensions within his family reached a breaking point. The arrangement they had been living under fell apart, and now, my ex-husband, Stephen, and his mother are living in public housing, working multiple part-time jobs just to get by. Even his mother, who once put all her energy into undermining me, is now contributing to their reduced circumstances.